Morrison. Toni Morrison is the first black woman, the work like a novel I've ever read from a black woman. I discovered The Bluest Eye, I would say fairly late in life. Maybe I was in like late teens, early 20s. And it was the first time that I was able to read something as a Nigerian living American that she put to words things that I have felt as a child. And it made such a huge, huge, huge impact on me. And I'm so thankful for her work and her life. So I'm going to read something from The Bluest Eye. And the years folded up like pocket handkerchiefs. Sammy left town long ago. Charlie died in the workhouse. Mrs. Breedlove still does housework. And Pecola is somewhere in that little brown house she and her mother moved to on the edge of town, where you can see her even now once in a while. The bird-like gestures are worn away to a mere picking and plucking her way between the tire rims and the sunflowers, between Coke bottles and milkweed, among all the waste and beauty of the world, which is what she herself was. All of our waste, which we dumped on her and which she absorbed. All of our beauty, which was hers first and which she gave to us. All of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleaned ourselves on her. We were so beautiful when we stood astride her ugliness. Her simplicity decorated us. Her guilt sanctified us. Her pain made us glow with health. Her awkwardness made us think we had a sense of humor. Her inarticulateness made us believe we were eloquent. Her poverty kept us generous. Even her waking dreams we used to silence our own nightmares, and she let us, and thereby deserved our contempt. We owned our egos on her, padded our characters with her frailty, and yawned in the fantasy of our strength. And fantasy it was, for we were not strong, only aggressive. We were not free, merely licensed. We were not compassionate, we were polite, not good, but well-behaved. We courted death in order to call ourselves brave, and hid like thieves from life. We substituted good grammar for intellect. We switched habits to simulate maturity. We arranged lies and called it truth, seeing in the new pattern of an old idea the revelation and the word. She, however, stepped over into madness, a madness which protected her from us simply because it bored us in the end. Oh, some of us loved her. The Manigault line, and Charlie loved her. I'm sure he did. He, at any rate, was the one who loved her enough to touch her, to envelop her, give something of himself to her. But his touch was fatal, and the something he gave her filled the matrix of her agony with death. Love is never any better than the lover. Wicked people love wickedly. Violent people love violently. Weak people love weakly. Stupid people love stupidly. But the love of a free man is never safe. There is no gift for the beloved. The lover alone possesses his gift of love. The loved one is shorn, neutralized, frozen in the glare of the lover's inward eye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adekbero. Who else has felt that thing where you're reading it and every sentence is just like cutting you like a knife, you know? For me actually, I thought I understood the experience of blackness in a very complete way until I read Toni Morrison, and I realized there was so much I didn't understand. And thank you very much, Adekbero, for reading that. Hawa Nuhu Shafi, please come.
I'm going to be reading a paragraph I really like from A Sight of Memory. It says, "The act of imagination is bound up with memory. You know, they straightened out the Mississippi River in places to make room for houses and livable acreage. Occasionally, the river floods these places. Floods is a word they use, but in fact, it is not flooding. It is remembering. Remembering where it used to be. All water has a perfect memory and is forever trying to get back to where it was. Writers are like that. Remembering where we were, what valley we ran through, what the banks were like, the light that was there, and the route back to our original place. It is emotional memory. What the nerves and the skin remember, as well as how it appeared. And the rush of imagination is our flooding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hawa. Kahiso Molope? No. Nichelle Smith, please.
Hello. I would say about Toni Morrison that before I knew what African goddesses were, before I understood what the concept of true human enslavement was, there was Toni Morrison to give us a sense of that. I read her back in the 80s when my mother excitedly gobbled up every book by a black female author that she could. And I didn't really understand Beloved then. I hadn't really had the life experiences and the experiences of research that I now have. So I'd like to read from that book with a new understanding. And the passage that I like best in this book that resonates with me in terms of goddesses and priestesses was exemplified by B. Richards in Oprah Winfrey's beloved movie, Baby Suggs, who brought black people into the clearing for a nature-based religious ceremony to talk and to love themselves. Baby Suggs in the clearing. She did not tell them to clean up their lives or to go and sin no more. She did not tell them they were blessed of the earth, in its inheriting meek or its glory bound pure. She told them that the only grace they could have was the grace they could imagine, that if they could not see it, they would not have it. Here, she said, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder they do not love your flesh. They despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder they flay it. And oh my people, they do not love your hands. Those that they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands. Love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face because they don't love that either. You got to love it. You. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder, out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavings instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved, feet that need to rest and to dance, backs that need support, shoulders that need arms. Strong arms, I'm telling you. And oh, my people, out yonder, hear me. They do not love your neck unnoosed and straight. So love your neck. Put a hand on it. Grace it, stroke it, and hold it up. And all your inside parts that they just as soon swap for hogs, you got to love them. The dark, dark liver, love it. Love it. And the beat and beating heart, love that too. More than eyes or feet. More than the lungs that have yet to draw free air. More than your life-holding womb and your life-giving private parts. Hear me now, love your heart. For this is the prize. Saying no more, she stood up then and danced with her twisted hip the rest of what her heart had to say, while the others opened their mouths and gave her the music. Long notes held until the four-part harmony was perfect enough for their deeply loved flesh.
It got me thinking that maybe we need to actually do that sometimes, as in get together at a festival and just have this space where somebody can read that and say touch and love, and we can actually just go through that ritual. What do you think? Yeah? Do it in the amphitheater. Just an exercise in self-love, you know, and valuing who we are and what we stand for and what we believe in and the space that we occupy in this world. So it's open. Who wants to come out and read something? Don't make me get up there and read the whole chapter of Bluest Eye to you. Anyone else? Just want to say a word, maybe tell us about a book that you read by Toni Morrison that really changed or moved you. Yeah, come please. Let's give him a round of applause since the rest of us didn't have the chest to come out.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Olajide Omojarabi. I think it was Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I read it fresh out of secondary school when I was still trying to understand what literature was all about and why I truly wanted to write and read. And the words there, I think I read it twice. The first time I read it because I truly wanted to read it and I truly wanted to understand what it was talking about. But the second time I went back to it because Beloved spoke in a language that I figured that if I too as a writer would learn to hone the skill of the art of writing that Toni Morrison had, it would help me to distinct myself. So I reread it, not only to understand what he was saying for the second time, but also to understand the message that she was trying to pass across. And after reading Toni Morrison, I went back to all of her other works. I went back to Sula, I went back to Songs of Solomon, and all of her works that she had written. And I realized that she didn't only speak for the black people across the world. She also wanted to make them understand that they had a voice and their voices needed to be heard. And for me, that was what sparked my interest in Black American literature. After reading Toni Morrison, I went back to reading all of other works, Zora Neale Hurston. I read the works of all other Black American writers that had actually written, because she introduced me to them and she made me fall in love with their works. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. You know, I was saying earlier with Beloved, I think, like you said, I just didn't have the maturity at the time. Things have not changed much for me. So maybe when I hit, you know, about 50, I'll just go back and read it. No, but it's true. I just felt I was too immature to immerse myself in it. So I'm quite jealous of this man who read it fresh out of secondary school. Obviously, he's cleverer than I am. So, who else would like to come out and say something? You can come out and read one more. Yes.
So this is a quote that I discovered maybe a couple of years ago, and living in America, it really rang true. And something happened yesterday at one of the panel discussions that made me want to read this quote. The function, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, so you spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on that fact that it is. Somebody says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of it is necessary. There will always be one more thing. Racism is the red flag the matador dances before the head of a bull. Its purpose is only to distract, to keep the bull's mind away from his power and his energy, to keep his mind focused on anything but his own business.
This is the sort of thing that makes us say bam in Nigeria. Have you heard that before? Bam. GBAM. Yeah, it's kind of like boom. But our own is sweeter. So we have time for two more. I think I should just take the liberty of, look, what's the point of having a Booker Prize winner in the room if you cannot call on her to come and say things, just like that? Bernadine, we love you, come. Please welcome Booker Prize winner, Bernadine Evaristo. I will never get tired of saying that. Sometimes in the night, when I'm sleeping, I wake up, I just say, yes, sir. Miss Morrison would have been so proud of you,
I was just sitting there quietly enjoying it. Not going to get up and say anything. Thank you very much. Yeah, Toni Morrison. She's my favourite author, always has been. I have sort of written things about her since her passing, and one of the things I think that's most amazing about her life is that she lived a very long creative life, and she was really acknowledged for her writing, from the moment she started writing. And so even though she passed, I felt her legacy is there. Everybody knows Toni Morrison's work, and if they don't, they're going to be introduced to it. I was introduced to her work as a young woman in my 20s, and I was growing up obviously in London and Britain, and we didn't have any books by black British women writers, apart from Bucci and Machetta. She was the only one, I think, publishing in the UK at that time. And I was coming of age, young black woman, feminist, writing and looking for inspiration. So we turned to African American writers. I get a bit upset when young British women turn to African American women writers today, because they're ignoring the writers who have come through since the 1980s. Yeah, I think they have been. But at that time, there really were no other sort of global black writers apart from the African Americans who were being published in the UK. And they were basically importing the success of African American writers, the British publishing industry. So rather than nurturing their own, they were bringing in people who were already successful. Alice Walker at that time was more famous than Toni Morrison. The Colour Purple was her big breakthrough book and the Steven Spielberg film. So she was the big global star. And of course still is a big global star, and deservedly so. But Toni Morrison was a harder work. She was a more poetic writer. She was deeper and complex. I think we've heard all that from everything that we've heard people read from today. And it took a while for her to sort of gain currency, I would say. But as soon as I read Toni Morrison, I realised that this woman was a genius, because she was writing from a very deep place, and she was honouring African American experience in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I think, again, with the extracts that were read just now, she was a philosopher in a way. She was a preacher. She was our mother. She was somebody who was seeing the wider context of, African American experience, which a lot of people could relate to, even though they weren't African American. And so my first book that I read of hers was The Bluest Eye, and then I read every book since. I reviewed a couple of her books for the British newspapers, and I don't think she lost her mojo. People think that Beloved was her greatest book, although, as Lola said, also her most difficult. But she was still reinventing herself into a great age, and even her later books. With her later books, she was kind of like returning to the slimmer books of her early career. and they were a bit more lightweight, and they were more impressionistic than the sort of comprehensive big books like Paradise and Beloved. But they were still incredible works of art. I'm thinking of Home, I'm thinking of A Mercy, I'm thinking of God Help This Child, which didn't get good reviews in the UK. I gave it a good review, and I just thought, she's still a really important writer, and she's still writing in a way that nobody else is. And one of the things she did for my generation of writers was to encourage us to develop our own voices. So when I say she's my favourite author, people often think, oh, you're trying to write like her. But actually, that's not true. I've never wanted to write like her. As writers, I feel that we should find our own voices. But she helped me find my own voice, as did others, like Gloria Naylor, Alice Walker, Audre Lorde, Michelle Cliff, who was Jamaican American, kind of lived most of her life in America. Barbara Smith was an editor of a book called Homegirls, African American Women's Anthology, which was groundbreaking when it was published in the early 80s. All these writers were just so inspiring. And so she was I think the inspiration behind a lot of us trying to write our own stories from our own cultures. My culture being Black British, obviously African diaspora, and also people on the continent. She also spoke up for us. So the thing about Toni Morrison is she didn't take her fame and run away with it and ignore her community, her global community, or African American women's community, or African American community. She spoke up for Black people in the world. And, that's not always the case. So she became then a sort of a spokesperson. Not that she could represent all our experiences, but she would say things like, why do people think that being an African American woman writer is restricting myself? She said, I do write as an African American woman writer. That is who I am. That's the culture I've grown up in, and that's the perspective from which I write. I say I'm a Black British writer, and I say exactly the same thing, and I got it from Toni Morrison. She would say, there's nothing limiting about that. This is what happens with white people, but their kind of demographic and their perspective is not labelled as such. So all the white writers in America who have written from that perspective, the white male writers who write from that perspective and cannot for the life of them write a female protagonist, let alone a Black female protagonist, that is exactly what they're doing. But it's not labelled as such because they are in the majority. Whereas because she is still seen as other, she has to label it as such, but also to own it and talk about the huge riches and diversity and complexity of African American experience. There is nothing limiting about owning that and writing from that perspective. And she would always speak up about political issues, obviously Mouthful of Blood, her book Playing in the Dark, which was looking at the African presence in canonical American literature, and that the presence is there through its invisibility. She was so on the money, and she was so intellectually astute in terms of contextualizing what it meant to be Black or African American through the ages. The other thing to say about Toni Morrison is that she did not publish her first book until she was 39. So she was a mature woman who had developed her skills as an editor for 20 years at Random House, right? Big conglomerate publisher now. So she had spent 20 years developing other writers, and each year she would take on one writer and she would make sure that she gave them the best kind of launch of their book that she could. But because she was an editor, she had a forensic eye for what worked in fiction. And so her taste was absolutely exquisite. And her writing, I felt, was never superfluous. It was always condensed and kind of poetic in its quality, in that her writing had the poetic layering of poetry, even though she was writing fiction. And let's not forget, she was also an experimental writer. I recently read Blue Sky, and I thought, oh my God, this is really experimental. She's playing around with form and how you tell stories in a way that people still don't do today. And the reason they don't do it is publishers want people to just write straightforward novels. So she was all those things, and she had incredible dignity, I heard her read, I met her once, I interviewed her, but then I interviewed her on long distance on the phone, and she had a really quiet voice. And I was asking her to speak up, and I couldn't keep asking her to speak up because it's Toni Morrison. So I couldn't say, "Can you speak up?" And so when I came off the phone, I couldn't hear her. So I had to quickly write up this, thank goodness it was a short interview. I had to quickly write up this interview because I hadn't been able to capture her voice on the phone. What else to say about her? When she passed, they used to talk about her winning the Nobel Prize and how she was the first black woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. And that really infuriated me, because which other black woman has won the Nobel Prize for Literature? Can you name anybody? No, she was the only black woman to win. This is how language works. She was the only black woman to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, and deservedly so. But that was in 1992. Do you know, does anybody know? That was nearly 30 years ago. And a black woman still has not won the Nobel Prize for Literature. So even though she was this totemic figure in the world of literature, lots of other people came up in her wake. Nobody else has achieved the status that she has achieved. And I think we need to register that and vocalize that, because there are other writers out there of stature who are writing incredible books who should deserve to win the Nobel Prize. When the Nobel Prize was won by 2 more white writers this year, I just thought, this is ridiculous, you know. One of them is an apologist for things that have happened in this country. I just thought this was rubbish. Anyway, getting back, what do I want to say? To finish off about Toni Morrison, I guess she made the world a richer place. She brought African American stories into the mainstream in a way that nobody else did. She had a very long, very productive career. She was a force for good in the world. And I think, probably in 100 years' time, people will still be inspired by her works, because she was such a sort of a mistress of the craft of writing incredible stories. That's it. Thanks very much.
You know that meme, or is it a GIF or GIF? I don't even know. When Obama just... That's how I feel now, because there's nothing more to add. You just did such a stellar job. Everything like that. All together, all joined, like we say in Nigeria. Thank you so much, Booker Prize winner, Bernardine Evaristo. It will be sweet in my mouth. I'm not stop saying it, so just get used to it. I love how it sounds. So when people ask you, when you came to Ake Festival, what you just say, we were just hanging out with Booker. What? Say it together. Okay, say we can do better than that, because I really want it to be clear and I don't want you to forget. So you say, Booker Prize winner. You first just use that one to whet people's appetite. So their minds will start wondering. You now add her name. Do you understand? Then you now say Naija babe at the end. See, when she was saying she was black British, I was just saying, what's wrong with this one? You that you're at home. If you are not careful, God, we won't let you go back. We'll keep her here. So remember, you first say, then the name, then you finish with Naija babe. Okay, so when people ask you, what happened when you came to Ake Festival? You say we were hanging out with Booker Prize winner, Bernardine Evaristo, Naija babe. Thank you very much, everyone.